Today, Japan is recognized as both a major economic force and a leader in technology. In the course of economic growth and the application of technology, Japan also earned a reputation as a heavily polluted country.
Japan has a crescent-shaped main island called Honshu, where their largest zinc mine resides. The Jinzu River is a main water source that offshoots from the Takahara River. The contamination of the river began in the 1920s and in the 1950s. After the end of World War II was when much of the recognition of itai disease came about. In 1955, the general public was warned of the itai disease by two local doctors who discovered the cadmium poisoning in local patients. The effects of the disease was observed in patients much earlier though, with some being seen to have mild disease onset as early as 1926. The Jinzu River in Fuchumachi is located in the Toyama Prefecture in Japan. Most of those who worked at the Fuchumachi farming region were affected. The heavy metal poisoning in the Jinzu River was a consequence of a zinc mining plant releasing its waste into the river. This waste released cadmium into the water system, even though the understanding of cadmium poisoning wasn't realized until recent years.
The river is an important water source to many communities along it. So by dumping the cadmium waste into a contaminated river, it affected a range of things, such as their drinking water, soil, and rice that they consumed on a daily basis. Cadmium is a heavy metal that causes the itai disease, and you will learn more about this event from experts such as Dr. Lee.
Hi, I'm Professor Smith, and Dr. Lee over here was kind enough to be interviewed in reporting about the itai disease. So, doctor, please tell me, how deadly was this disease?
Actually, over about 200 people were diagnosed as victims, half of those of which died. Though we did find that a few were suspected of having the disease, those numbers were a little vague.
Okay, I see. That's pretty deadly then.
Yes.
And who did you see coming in primarily?
Well, it was a disproportionate association amongst the people that we did see. However, it seemed to be mostly older women that had bore several children in their lifetime.
Okay, interesting. And what about their symptoms? Did they have any reoccurring symptoms from patient to patient?
Yeah, we did see a spike in osteomalacia cases. That was kind of what brought it to our attention. Initially, we have found that their bones were deformed and they were suffering from extreme pain, hence the name itai, which means it hurts, it hurts. It appeared to be what we thought to be a vitamin deficiency, however, that wasn't the case.
I see. So what was the original source? Do you all know yet?
Actually, we did find out in 1961. Another doctor, co-worker of mine, published his findings about the contaminated rice. They ended up testing it and found out that the rice contained large amounts of cadmium, and it was concluded there was a correlation with cadmium and this disease.
I see. Well, thank you very much for sharing with us. We appreciate it.
Oh, of course.
The heavy metal cadmium was in the river, which thus absorbed into growing foods and the soil nearby. As a result, the soybeans and rice grown in that area contained trace amounts of cadmium, which slowly poisoned those consuming it. If there were large amounts of cadmium all at once, then the victims would experience extreme vomiting. Known early signs of itai disease was joint pain, back pain, and weakening of bones. As the disease progressed, victims developed liver failure, bone fractures, and terrible pain with movement. The origin of the metal poisoning was from the waste produced by the Mitsui Mining and Smelting Company. The harmful waste was produced from the smelting process for zinc, and that waste was dumped into the Jinsu River, thus contaminating the water, and the mine had no purification process to remove any harmful heavy metals. The locals who farmed and worked the land were the initial group to be impacted by the disease, and thus to seek help. Around 1957, Dr. Haguenau investigated the spike of osteomalcia cases, and he was already suspicious of the mine being the cause of the contamination of the water. A group effort was made between Dr. Jun Kabashi and Dr. Haguenau to study the cadmium and thus itai disease. Their research eventually led to the conclusion that itai disease was due to cadmium poisoning.
Because the mine dumped their waste that contained heavy metals into an open water source, there was no filtration to remove harmful toxicants from the water. The water that was contaminated was the primary source of water for the Fuchu-Machi community. This created an environmental justice issue because the community that lives on the river were negatively affected and were mainly a low-income community.
Cadmium exposure was not very well known in this time. It was typically welders and other small populations exposed, so finding the reason for these high levels of cadmium took some time. The average age of mild disease onset was 48 years old, and the average death age was 79 years old. The lifetime cadmium intake continued to rise throughout the patient's life, implying that the exposure was lifelong, and the extended exposure is what progressed the disease and caused death. Of the 200 officially diagnosed victims from 1955 to 1970, half of the victims died.
Pollution damage affects life, health, culture, and the natural environment. Such damage cannot be fully accounted using monetary terms. Economically speaking, the report concludes that it's far more rational to institute pollution control devices before the damage is done.
In 1971, the Environmental Agency was established and began researching itai disease and cadmium poisoning. The Mitsui Mining and Smelting Company now monitors the waste through an 8-step process to reduce as much of the hazardous heavy metals as possible. Some of it is even recycled, which helps to save the company money. The mining company has made and continues to make many efforts in controlling its impact on the surrounding area, and has cooperated with outside experts to continue to improve their environmental standards. There was also a group formed by the residents of the affected area in 1966 called the Itai Disease Residents Association, and this group put forth a lot of effort in response to the crisis. One large economic cost that follows the polluter pays principle is the number of lawsuits and settlements that came as a result of the water contamination. The lawsuit filed by the Residents Association in 1968 was one of the largest pollution lawsuits in Japanese history. Many treatments of the land have been planned and has cost millions of yen. The largest of these was between 1992 and 2004, costing 25.5 billion yen.